Somewhere in maybe 3rd or 4th grade, I noticed that in winter I liked standing in the exhaust clouds of cars waiting to pick up their children. Trying to duplicate the effect at home, I thought to open the gas tank and sniff. It didn't take me long to realize that plugging one nostril and putting the other to a gas can spout was more effective. Immediately I would feel enveloped in warmth and completely relax. Auditory hallucinations came first, primarily in the form of an engine sound, like a lawnmower, that varied in volumes and pitch and seemed to rotate around me. I continued huffing. I only learned this term fairly recently, as I guess many kids are doing this recreationally now. I'm quite a trendsetter, and eventually I would experience visual hallucinations as well. Usually, it would be cracks of stains in the garage floor that would morph into dragons or other such creature. I would sit there and watch the creation dance and move and be utterly fascinated. Only once was I ever disturbed or frightened by what I experienced. Every other time I felt only soothed and curious. One particularly vivid hallucination involved seeing through an oil stain in the floor into a world of primitive cavemen. I watched this world and the cave people's activities for what seemed a long time when a group of them suddenly looked at me. I realized that I was their god and felt immense satisfaction. While huffing, I always felt stripped of energy and overly burdened by gravity. When I felt I was done, usually because I was too tired to continue, I would stumble into the house and lie down on the couch and generally pass out for a short time. Often, I woke to one of my parents coming home, growing worried about the gas smell in the house. They somehow missed the fact that it was coming off of my breath. This continued, generally weekly during the school year, but happened daily during the summer, until the summer after my freshman year in high school. I had gotten to the point where I would go out whenever I felt like it, even when my parents were home. One time, I hallucinated my dad standing in the doorway. He began yelling at me and I was scared, not in the way fear normally feels, but dulled and slow. Swamp terror. Then he suddenly began echoing and his form began to flicker in a circle around me. I was immediately relieved that it wasn't real and continued my business. It wasn't long before my mother ended up catching me. She freaked out, of course, and I went through scores of medical tests and we sought out family counseling, a waste. The medical tests revealed no immediate health concerns, though the doctor told my mother that there was brain damage. I ended up huffing gasoline for 5 or 6 years. I'm grateful to be alive, but not a day goes by that I don't wonder about the kind of person I would be if I hadn't destroyed some part of my brain. I have a terrible memory and often friends and family recount stories involving me that I have no recollection of. At the time, I wanted to escape desperately and I was too young to understand the dangers, but I have a son now and I want to hold on to every moment I have with him. Not to mention wanting to offer him everything in the world. I bought a rotary lawnmower, and when that didn't work, an electric one, simply to avoid having a gas can in my house. I'm 32 years old now and I still catch myself taking deep breaths when I fill my car up with gas and catch a whiff. Nothing I have tried has come close to the cloying warmth and dreamy visions of the gasoline huffing. Most of the things I tried were in the hope that something could turn my attention away from the gas. I wish I had known. Information alone could have saved years of regret. This is difficult to explain. However, I will try my best to describe the experience. I was an art school student in San Diego, and had been working on a project for my perspective class. The drawing was finished and I had grabbed my paper cement to secure my project onto a black backboard. Now, before I go any further, I was living in a very small studio with horrible ventilation. As I was putting the glue on the board to secure my drawing, I started to get a slightly cold and tingly feeling all through my hands and feet. I figured it was the glue and just continued to work. The effects had spread and started creeping up into my abdomen. It was a very nice feeling. I then decided that I was going to try sniffing the can to see what all my old punk rock buddies were talking about when they said they sniffed glue. I took the cap/brush off the can and placed it to my nose and began to inhale the fumes for about a minute. At first my entire body got cold and tingly and soon enough the hand that was holding the can to my face started to look like an elephant's trunk to me. It was amusing, so I continued to sniff the fumes from this horrible glue. About 15 seconds later I was looking at my cutting board, which was a big green rubber mat with a grid on it for precise cutting. The pattern started to appear on everything I looked at, a yellow-green grid on everything in my studio. The sounds of my air conditioner and my refrigerator started to echo and clash with each other, and soon, I began to suffer from a spinning effect much like when you drink far too much. The patterns were still placed on everything I saw and was beginning to clash with the sounds from my AC. The spinning became more of a half spin that violently went back and forth. Soon I felt as though my body was being pulled from every direction. The spinning continued to get worse, it started to spin from several different directions, and the pattern from my cutting board was still present, but from all the spinning had started to create new patterns and textures. The pattern soon turned into that of casino chips covered in pool tablecloth. Then the casino chips started to spin individually. All I could think to myself is, wow. So I just died and this is what the afterlife is like? Soon, the spinning became much worse and the sounds became that of those little metal balls that are suspended and hit each other, only it was much more rapid and rather disturbing. Out of nowhere it all went away and I was suspended in nothingness. I had no body, no head, nothing, I was just a spiritual essence. During this time suspended in nothingness, I remember being told the meaning to life and how we all got here. Then, the hell began. Remember the Matrix when Neo says he needs weapons and those thousands of rows of weapon racks flew into the scene? It was something like that, but it was rows of fire and souls. Screams of women and children surrounded me from every direction. Shortly after that, it all just disappeared and then a silhouette of a man in a fedora was approaching, but it was a silhouette made of green coat. His head soon flew away and then I heard static. Nothing but static for what seemed like a lifetime. I then hear a voice saying, "Your life begins today, please turn your television set off now." I now feel something cold from underneath me, so I look down and see a shiny cold object and then bam, I am back in reality, but not quite. I tried to move, and I did. But I felt like my body was still sitting down. My legs were moving, but I felt like I was still in the chair, and still felt like I had the can in my hand, but it was not, it was on the table. I sat down on the couch, and my arms felt like they were made of rubber and had sagged to the floor, like an old, abused Stretch Armstrong. About a minute later I felt normal again, but with a crushing headache. This experience had disturbed me so badly that all I did for a week was sit in my bed thinking about what had happened and was desperately trying to remember the good details about the experience and what it meant. My friends tried to talk to me, but I was so disturbed I could not even acknowledge their presence. Never, ever, ever will I make that mistake again. I was once a Christian, but now I don't know what to believe. Are we a computer program? Are we just molecules in something much bigger? Do we live in a matrix? I don't know, but I know that every time I go to church all I can think about is this experience and how disturbing it was. Several years later I tried ecstasy for the first time and that has helped me greatly in dealing with this. I will regret it for the rest of my life. I read a lot about people huffing petrol products, dust-off, varnish remover and other solvents. It seems that majority of these people report bad experiences. I can't speak about these, however, as a regular huffer of liquid butane, petrol lighter refills, I can only report good experiences. However, the resulting damage of a 5-year abuse is now painfully apparent to me. I started huffing having never previously taken drugs of any kind. I didn't even smoke regulars back then. I happened to fall in with a crowd of huffers, although, for a long time I resisted the temptation. I finally gave in after an argument with my parents in which I had walked out and was determined to do anything to avoid going back home that night. My first huff started that night. I was only 17. The first few huffs taste strange but leave a warm glowing feeling inside, like the warm glow I get after a few whiskeys. This comes on always within the first minute and feels good. Fingers start to tingle and generally the experience is a lot like the pleasant onset of drunkenness. The next few huffs feel vaguely sexual, my whole body seems to hum and buzz and every breath brings a feeling to my chest like the nervousness of being with someone I love when I feel it is time to tell them how I feel. A delightfully giddy excitement and my breathing feels shallow at times and I feel the need to concentrate on my breathing. A slight paranoia about the stupidity of what I am doing often accompanies this but soon disappears. For a while I rest in this state, breathing normally and feeling quite comfortable. I wait until any developing paranoia leaves me and I am ready to continue. I feel warm and glowing, relaxed and happy. The room seems a little different but I couldn't explain how, and sometimes little lights seem to flicker in my peripheral vision, like those I get when tired. Nothing spectacular. The next few deep huffs after this state inevitably bring an audio effect which can only be described as a sort of ambient Jew's harp or some kind of spring. A boing sound that comes from nowhere in particular and seems to permeate everything. Sudden noises or speaking make it stop only for it to creep back again. My voice seems a little strange, as do the voices of others with me. We try not to talk. Strange lights play around the edges of objects and everything seems less real and take on an almost dreamlike quality that is hard to convey. A few more huffs and there is a very rapid change in my perception. Like some perceptual cog slipping into or more likely out of place. It happens so cleanly and suddenly that I can almost point to it. Suddenly I notice the wooden floor is made of wooden jigsaw pieces and this seems normal. I smile. The room now seems so different that I cannot tell you whose room it is or where it happens to be. It seems to exist on its own. It is all that exists. I cannot visualize anything beyond what I immediately see. A few more huffs and the whole open eye hallucination clicks into place and everything becomes different. The trips are often very similar in nature, at least, people and rooms always change consistently, so I will explain the most common features that I see at this point. One of my regular huffing companions changes into a ragdoll. He has yellow wool hair and I can see every twisted strand clearly. The more I try to see past the illusion, the more perfect the illusion becomes until normal vision is absolutely impossible. My other friend turns into the girl from a well-known television test card that the BBC used to use. This ties in with the ragdoll who is also from the same test card image. The back of their sofa is suddenly made of dark-colored oversized jigsaw pieces stacked on their sides against the wall. Some of these have fallen forwards and piled up to make the seat of the sofa. Detail is amazing and again I cannot, however hard I try, see past the illusion. On this occasion I am wearing a fluffy white jumper with a gray band across the middle that I got for Christmas. It makes me feel furry and friendly and I suddenly realize that I am in fact an old English sheepdog. I can't see myself, I just know. I laugh a kind of breathy dog laugh because I realize that I am not actually allowed on the sofa. They haven't noticed this and allow me to remain. The table has become a stack of 4 oversized children's alphabet blocks and suddenly I do not recognize any feature of the room although I feel at home here. Looking at the television I am struck with a sudden realization that everything has been reversed, that we are inside the television and a normal world lies beyond through that opening of light. We are the test card. I smile. Huffing again, nothing further happens except that I prolong the state. It is complete and no amount of huffing seems to change things. Looking at the fire I see a light show in the distance and fancy that it's a vast arena where a band is playing. I can hear the band in the crowd, although, later I realize it was on the tape we were playing during the huff, a live version of a techno classic. I am enthralled and want to see more but I am aware that I am too large to get in, and that, also, I am a dog. I bark. They look at me. I look at them. I look at the television. I scratch my ear. I look back at them. They look at television. It all seems so natural and I know that many of you will believe that I am making this up. But the truth is that my head is so full of toxins that almost anything is possible at this point. The fact that it seems so real and natural is, I believe, what makes this a frequently reoccurring reality. But it feels so real that in that moment I could swear that my eyes have been opened to a greater and more true reality. One time I went to retrieve some cigarettes from the fireside opposite me. My feet were moving awkwardly and I looked down to notice that they could not step on the joints in the jigsaw floor. Not only this but the tile under my foot seemed to rise up to meet me with each step. Barely perceptible, just an inch or so. By the middle of the room the tiles are rising about 2 foot and I try to put my foot down through the gap to touch the floor below but I physically cannot. The tile below my foot comes to meet me and the other one falls away. By the time I reach the fireplace I seem to be about 40 feet in the air and rising all the time. I can see the room far below and air whistles around my head. Turned out later that the kitchen window was open. I see light snow and it feels good. Looking forwards I see the fireplace in front of me and finally locate my cigarettes which had changed pack color. They were actually someone else's, and finally got back to the sofa. Sitting on the sofa I can see the fireplace opposite me and at the same level as myself. I laugh, and then feel self-conscious. I sit and watch the others for a while and get bored. A few more huffs and I pass out stunningly. Seeing the white bag wrapped around by O-shaped hand coming up to my face like a funnel. I inhale deeply, again it comes to my face, and again, and again, and again very fast like a trail except that I feel each funnel hitting the last. I feel their impact through my hand and lips until suddenly I fly backwards and into a bigger funnel behind me and the chain of funnels takes me down into another alternate reality, a butane dream. I am unconscious. This is where vivid closed-eye hallucinations begin. Tunes repeat endlessly and sometimes mockingly and I feel I am trapped inside some vast arcade game. Everything is colorful and perfectly vivid. Things revolve around simple rules here although I am not always sure of what those rules are. Something keeps flying past me picking up parts of the scenery as it goes and I am jumping over blocks to avoid it. A floating orange figure called Wordy who is a hemisphere with black arms and no body hovers in front of me. Wordy watches Word Watchers. Hello Word Watchers watching, he says, Somewhere a crowd of children say hello word in unison, a dark thing called the onus is bouncing around with the sound of an unceasing Jewish harp, and a springy chorus of words sing a song about catching the onus and repeating tunes and words. It is altogether quite beautiful. I race around corridors and passages, sometimes being chased, sometimes chasing wordy. There seems to be something I am supposed to be doing, but I don't know what it is. All I know is that I have a purpose in all of this. I belong here. I have some vital role. Suddenly the black onus thing comes up behind me and I become part of that blackness. The song is all that exists, but now I hear it muffled like I am floating inside of something much bigger than myself. I hear and feel a loud pop that seems to come from inside my own head, and suddenly I am back in the room and things are returned almost to normal. Total duration was about an hour and a half. For most of that time I was asleep, but it seems like much longer. Later, as the effects wear off, I will feel a little nauseous and be unable to look at food. The rest of the day I feel disconnected and slow, like a hangover. I cannot think of anything except the most simple things. The rest of the second day I find it hard to concentrate. An interesting point to note is that items in my dream change predictably. Maybe it is so real and overpowering that it is hard to hallucinate anything else. Once having had one major trip in those surroundings, moving to different surroundings often creates a different trip, although people often carry their characters with them. Whenever I wear white now I am an old English sheepdog. And my dark-haired friend is almost always a yellow-haired ragdoll in any environment. Such is the power of these illusions on my psyche. Long-term side effects. We used to take butane by bag or rolled handkerchief, and occasionally the compressed gas refill, about once a month, and after a year I didn't feel any lessening of my abilities in real life or any loss of vividness in my high state. Nevertheless, I changed to just doing it about once every 2 months, and after 5 years of regular abuse I started to notice acute short and long-term memory deficits and large gaps appearing in my past where I couldn't remember anything. Items I had once and can't remember where they went, whether they broke or were sold. Places where I used to live I can no longer find or remember the area. Sometimes walking home on a familiar route I pause at a corner unsure of which way to go. For a few minutes both ways seem wrong and I couldn't choose. Only once I became so confused about the direction home that I just stopped and cried. I thought I was losing my mind. A lady stopped and asked me what was wrong and I had to tell her I'd forgotten where I lived. She seemed a little puzzled why a man of my age would cry about such a thing. I was 22, and she just assumed I was new to the area. I'd actually lived there 6 years. I told her the street name and she looked it up in the A to Z in her car and, you know what? I was actually standing at the junction at the end of my own street. I felt so stupid as I walked down the street hoping that I would find something about it that I recognized, but nothing until I actually got to my front door. I recognized that but not the street. Many years have passed since then and I have not touched butane since. The smell now makes me feel sick. And my short/long-term memory is improving and my cognitive skills are back to normal, I believe. But there are still large clouds over my memories of times before I did butane. I am now 29 and have a child. I take occasional ecstasy now and find it has none of the problems of my previous inhalants and enhances my feeling of reality and belonging without distorting it. I consider these trips to be better than the random trips I have had from LSD and also way superior to nose, but not if I stop at the warm fuzzy feeling. I have to drive through to the perceptual change and open eye hallucination and possibly even until I get sleepy and pass out and have the amazingly vivid butane dreams. Otherwise it's no better an experience than drinking spirit alcohol. I wouldn't change my experiences for anything. I have been places and experienced things that no other man has experienced. And in this respect it is worthwhile, rather like climbing a mountain or trekking to the North Pole. I have been a dog, visited what were essentially alternate universes, lived inside a TV, floated over bizarre perfect landscapes and met some very interesting characters, many of whom I still have vivid memory of, and still more that I have forgotten completely. If I could change anything I would have just used it just a few times and then stopped before I became damaged, as it is certainly taking a long time to recover all my mental faculties.
First of all, I will say that huffing gasoline was the most exciting, crazy, weird and best drug I'd ever done in my life. So far, I'm only 21, I've done ecstasy, it was wonderful. I did acid, it didn't work at all. No matter who I bought it from or how much I took, I never saw anything or tripped, it just felt like I was on a sailboat rocking back and forth. I've done weed, crystal meth, cocaine and even crack. I did some shit that was supposed to put me into a so-called rabbit hole, but it never happened. Guess that was some fake shit. And I love Laura Tab. Demerol is good only in the drip form, hospital. First experience. I am hanging with my female friend at a friend's house. Our two guy friends had left for a while then came back. When they came back they were laughing all over us reeking of gasoline. We were like, what in the hell? We said, what the hell is wrong with you, and why in the hell do you smell like gas? They started laughing saying, huh, we've been huffing gas man, huh? We thought that was retarded. We had never heard of getting high off of gasoline, didn't even know that we could. They end up talking us into going down the road and doing it also even though we thought it was superficial. We get to this huge parked 18-wheeler with a rig on it. And it's nighttime with nothing but one deserted dirt road and woods all around us. The two guys tell us to huff off of this gas tank opening on the big rig. So we do. When I did it and all of a sudden my body starts feeling all tingly and warm inside. After a couple of minutes, the two guys started saying that there were aliens watching them and talking to them from in the woods nearby. We were surrounded by woods. Me and my friend laughed and thought it was funny. Then they dared me and her to take 10 hits off of it in a row, or huffs. So I did. After doing 10 in a row I blacked out. In my head, I had died and all of a sudden, I became a comma, in a biblical sentence. I was gonna remain as this as a punishment from God for the rest of eternity. Pretty crazy, huh? Then I started coming back to consciousness. I saw a black and white image in front of me of some old baseball player getting ready to swing his bat. Then I came more to and realized I was sitting on the ground with my arms wrapped around this person's leg. But it was just one of the guys bending over huffing off the gas tank. Experience 2. This is hard to put into words but, me and the same girlfriend were huffing. We were at this house that was vacant. We had the gas can sitting on the porch. We were leaning over taking turns huffing it. At one point, my friend was leaning over huffing off the gas can. I was really fucked up watching her. When she came up, she all of a sudden looked like a blow-up doll. It's like she was deflated, leaning over huffing, then inflated, as she leaned or straightened upright. And when she was all the way blown up, this is so damn funny, all this birthday cake splattered on me. And all of a sudden it was my birthday and her sister, who was not there, had planned a surprise birthday party for me. All the trees and shrubs around us had these little lights at the base of them and I was screaming for joy, oh my god. How did you all do this? This is so cool. And my friend is all messed up too, doesn't even know what I'm talking about. All she does is just look at me and laugh, doesn't say anything, which keeps me going. Then some man comes out of his house from across the street and is like, excuse me, are you guys okay? And me and my friend start stumbling off and saying yay, we're fine. And he asked something about us drinking I think, but I can't remember for sure. We had been screaming and yelling all excited over God knows what. Experience 3. This one is really hard to explain. Me and the same friend are huffing on the same porch at the same vacant house at night again. A ways into it, the gas can turns into this cartoon looking thing. I wish I could draw a picture cause I can't describe it. It was almost like the gas can nozzle had turned into this dark red trumpet that it was talking to me out of. It started hopping around in the spot where it was sitting on the porch. It was as if I had been living this fairy tale story and all of a sudden it brought me out of it to tell me what I was doing wrong in the story, my life. It was trying to tell me something very important. Then my friend turned into an angel and had been secretly watching me throughout my life and also sat with me on the porch to tell me what I was doing wrong in my life. I can't remember what the hell was said but it freaked me out. Experience 4. This was around the beginning of me doing this also. I was at my house. It was only me and my mom. My dad had his boat parked out by the side of the house. There was a big gas can hooked to the motor. I was out there huffing it. At the time my mom didn't know I did this. So when she came out there she didn't quite understand why I was so fucked up. Well, she couldn't stop me. I was young and dumb. I was doing this in front of my mom thinking she wouldn't stop me. I had a piece of candy in my mouth when I started. Eventually when I got really messed up she came outside and started saying something to me. I started yelling back. I was so messed up that I didn't realize there was a piece of candy in my mouth and thought it was my tongue that had came loose in my mouth. It didn't disturb me very much, I just grabbed it out of my mouth and threw it on the ground. That was weird. Experience 5. I was outside by the boat again. This time no one was at home but me. I was huffing and all of a sudden the electrical pole or telephone pole, doesn't have a street light, at the corner end of my yard started talking to me. It didn't have a mouth, it was talking to me telepathically. It was placing thoughts into the subconscious part of my brain that I wouldn't know about or wouldn't come about until later on in life. Crazy shit, and the tree right in front of me, a crepe myrtle, was telling the telephone pole, no mouth but telepathically, that is not allowed. You're not allowed to do that to someone. Some ancient rule or something. Anyways, I was looking down the street. I started hearing these noises of cars riding over a metal bridge. Then I started hearing these sounds of a man saying, a silver toll to cross the bridge. And what was happening is the street adjacent to mine had turned into a toll bridge. I had to pay a silver dollar to cross the bridge. And I could hear people putting the coin in the slot and driving over it. I could even see the top bridge rails. I think that's what it was. Weird. Experience 6. I had a gas can and was chillin' in my backyard. My backyard has a lot of trees and shrubbery, by the way. No one was home. I was lying out in the sun in my bathing suit. I was underneath the shade of a small sweet gum maple tree, I think that's the name, huffing. I had the cordless phone out there too. So every once in a while I was huffing, I would accidentally hit the on button on the phone with my leg without realizing it. The operator would come on and instead of it saying, "We're sorry, if you'd like to make a call," I would hear it as, "ORLE, then something." Anyways, at one point, this frog hopped up in front of me from behind me. Yes, it was a real toad, but in my head, I believed that I was some kind of witch and that the frog had came from me. I had created this frog and set it out into the wild. Experience 7. I was huffing gas with this girl I had met down the road that was into it too. It was a sunny day. We were huffing it out of a gas can. This was a gas can that had a tube that I could pull out of it. Well, I didn't know that this one was like that. So we're huffing and I got pretty fucked up, again as usual, and I didn't realize it, but I began sucking the gasoline up through the tube thing that was inside, not pulled out, and taking gulps of the gasoline. The girl I was with started slapping me on the back saying, "What the hell are you doing? You're drinking that shit." And she took the gas can from me. I looked at her all funny, she had told me, and was like, "Why'd you take my flower juice?" And a few moments later I came to and realized what I had done. I even remembered drinking it even though I didn't know what I was drinking at the time. There were these little white flowers all around us at the time, which would explain the flower juice thing. So we stopped. I don't know how much I had ingested, but it was at least 2 gulps. I don't know how I didn't die. I wonder how much I would have to drink to die. But in the next couple of hours, each time I burped I tasted that damn gas. It made me wanna throw up. Which I probably should have, so one of our friends picked us up and they stopped by a gas station. I decided to get some cream soda. Maybe put something in my stomach that would take away that taste when I burped. Well, wrong idea. It did nothing but make me burp more and made it taste even worse. End of it all. What caused me to pretty much stop doing this is the sounds that I started hearing that weren't really there. I began to hear this low buzzing noise. It sounded like it was coming from the power lines above my head. Which made me begin to think that because I huffed gas it caused me to hear the electricity running through the wires. I know it sounds crazy. Then what actually scared me out of doing it is this blaming noise. I kept hearing this noise in the distance. I couldn't place where it was coming from exactly. It sounded as if someone had a sledgehammer and was pounding on the side of a building that had aluminum siding. It didn't bother me when it first started, but the more I huffed, I noticed the louder and closer it got, even though I couldn't pinpoint it. Finally it dawned on me one day when I was kind of sober. And it almost made me piss my pants. There is a saying, "You will hear me knocking at your door." Something like that. Well, that really got me to quit. I really believe that after a year and a half of huffing gasoline, God was knocking at my door. He was warning me. The sound of the knocking, which as months passed became a gradually louder blaming sound. I couldn't have fun when I was huffing. The sound was so loud it overtook all the hallucinations I would have normally. It came to the point where I really began to believe something was coming after me. I had no idea what it was, but it was creepy. I'd start huffing and there it was, again, even louder and closer sounding this time. Whatever it was going to get me. And I consciously knew this. So I quit. After a month or two I realized that what it was, what I truly believe, was death knocking at my door. Getting closer and closer. What happened to me about 3 months after I had completely stopped huffing gas and doing any kind of drug was unexpected. I first began to not sleep. I felt like I didn't even need to. I started to become delusional, exactly like a schizophrenic. I believed people I knew very well were actually undercover detectives watching every move I made. I can't go into all the details, but mainly I thought I was psychic and knew these things and all the colors meant something and so forth. I ended up going in the hospital. I got better after a week of being in there and got out. Didn't do any kind of drugs or anything, yet I became even worse and not only becoming even more delusional but began hallucinating, seeing and hearing things that weren't really there. So I went into the hospital again. I was then committed from that hospital to an institute for about 6 months. I did get better after the first month or two of being in there. I got out and have been fine ever since in that aspect. I even did other drugs and stuff, did not huff anything, and was fine. It's almost unexplained by the psychiatrists I've been to. It's the fact that I had quit huffing, and did not do any other drug for about 3 months. Then all of a sudden my brain decided to turn on me. I finally quit doing drugs and just stuck to drinking. It's been like that now for a few years. Now I am a manic depressive. I will pretty much have to be on antidepressants for the rest of my life. And antidepressants don't even really do shit. They barely motivate me to get up out of the bed and live life. I also have an anger problem now that has caused me to go to jail a few times and pay a hefty fine a few times. I can't handle stress like a normal person. My stress turns into anxiety and anxiety into anxiety attacks. For the past 2 years I've been having chest pains in this one spot on the left side of my chest that I'm gonna probably need to get checked out when I eventually get a job in insurance again. I get ridiculously scared sometimes when I'm by myself. I get these brief feelings that something is in the house with me. Therefore I cannot live by myself. If my boyfriend isn't here one night I have to get a friend or something to stay with me. Then I'm okay. My psychiatrist has said that the main cause of my problems is from the gasoline chemicals that I put into my body and brain, that screwed up the chemicals in my body and brain, more than likely for life.
I have taken several drugs that induce hallucinations including psilocybin, dextromethorphan, and MDMA. Butane is a powerful substance and one of my best friends seems to hate its effects. The famed Zoom is perhaps the most commonly understood description of its effects, and those who have done butane will know what I mean. But being very analytical of drug experiences I will try to go into a bit more detail. Upon inhalation, which usually occurs in my bathroom with the fan heater switched on to cover up the noise of the can, several things happen immediately. The noise that the fan heater makes somehow seems to get faster and gain a higher pitch. The best way to describe this is to compare this to the noise a train makes slowly taking off in a subway and within the space of a few seconds, rapidly accelerating into the tunnel. My body straight away begins to feel a familiar sense of tingly warmth. I can feel it in my whole body. It takes over my tactile sensations and I just flow with it. The tips of my fingers and the inside of my mouth feel like they're made out of cotton wool, and when I exhale my first toke I just know it's butane. To experience the more subtle effects, which for me are what make butane such a unique and wonderful substance, I need to take 3 or 4 more tokes. This is when the hallucinogenic properties kick in. Everything lights up. Everything I look at becomes a brilliant geometric clockwork of shapes, swirls and sharp-edged notches. It's impossible to describe and it's impossible to isolate or concentrate on any one particular part of the butane kaleidoscope. I can't encapsulate anything I see in my mind's eye for even a second. It seems to change faster than I can see or think. Everything almost seems to dance, beautifully timed, rhythmical and systematic. The most minuscule parts of the most ordinary objects seem like I'm magnifying into their existence and seeing the most delicate intricate details of their construction. It's like being inside a clock tower and seeing thousands of perfectly interlocked wheels, pulleys and levers working together in brilliant harmony. And then the sounds. Apart from the constantly accelerating train sound, I cannot hear anything else. All the sounds that occur within the butane sensorium are inside my mind. Again, they seem to flow and dance, and it's absolutely impossible to recreate them, even in my mind, because they change faster than I can perceive them. These are sounds that I would never hear in real life. Waveforms that I don't think even exist, and they are not even sounds as such, but hearing would be the most relevant of the senses, and so my mind automatically dumps these pseudo-sounds into the auditory section of the neurological four-tuple. These pseudo-sounds flow and interlock with all the visionary perceptions that I experience, and to top this off, all I have to do is move my hands or fingers in front of me and I become wholly integrated into the butane theater. Every movement I make will correspond with what I see and hear. It feels like a dancer who has been rehearsing for years just to get every millisecond of his dance time to perfection. And of course, if I become overly aware of my random gestures, I will once again see that it's all inside my mind. Concentrating or isolating in an attempt to understand or remember this mind show is impossible. All I can do is flow with it. Meanwhile this is all happening, I experience what I call hyper-thoughts. This once again is indescribable and must be experienced as a whole, rather than attempting to break it down analytically while it's happening. But I'll try to explain exactly what I mean. My thoughts are being created and processed seemingly so fast that I move from one thought to the next thought before my conscious mind can word it inside my head to make sense of it. I will find myself having wordless conversations that make perfect sense, asking questions, answering them, gaining insight into spontaneously created hyper-subjects, and then just as fast dismissing my previous train of hyper-thought by what seems like a profound and solid explanation for what and why I were thinking only seconds ago. And superficially, of course, any attempt to consciously make sense of what seemed like an entire conversation within the space of seconds, flushes all my hyper-thoughts out of existence, leaving me with a dumbfounded and blank realization that I'm on butane. And that brings a smile to my face. In a way, this is similar to the mind blank I get after too much MDMA, or the confused endless attempts to figure out the thing when I've done too many mushrooms. Of course, the advantage is that it's instant and gone out of my system within 5 minutes at most. If I inhale too much butane from a prone position, I may find myself phasing out of reality. This can seem like a somewhat unpleasant, viscous sensation. Almost like a mental quicksand with an increasing zoom, noise inside my head. Allowing myself to flow with this quicksand can result in two things. Either an extremely vivid butane dream, which is beyond attempting to describe, words can only do so much, and this experience is beyond words, or a complete feint. Maybe the feint is a direct follow-up of the butane dream, except that there is no memory of the dream. I suppose this depends on just how much butane one induces to get to this stage. Butane does have unpleasant side effects as well. Sore back and spine, sore chest, difficulty breathing and difficulty getting an erection, among others. Then I must consider the damage it is doing to my brain cells and my CNS. I feel tired and have a sore head for up to an hour after doing butane. About 9 months ago, my curiosity got the best of me and I tried inhaling from a can of air duster. Duster is nothing like what some of the people on the internet describe. There are no hallucinations, and most importantly, I do not come down quickly, at least, not if I take more than a couple of huffs. But people are right in reporting that it is very addictive, and in retrospect very scary. On my first attempt, I pointed the straw of the nozzle into my open mouth and sprayed as I inhaled. I tried this about 3 times and felt a slight buzz, but I decided I wasn't getting enough for it to work, so I closed my mouth around the straw and deeply inhaled the spray. I held my breath for as long as I could, and after several seconds I began to hear a pulsating, rushing sound in my ears, then suddenly an intense wave of pleasure swept over me. How do I describe it? It was like I was taken into another world. Nothing around me mattered, all that mattered was the pleasure inside me, and the nagging question, how could anything feel so good? When the initial rush was over, I felt two things. First, I felt like I had found everything I ever wanted. It was perfect gratification. In a way it was a numb feeling, but not like alcohol. It was the kind of numbness that comes from an experience so intensely joyful that there is no need to say, feel, or do anything else. Second, I wanted more. I wanted the feeling to go on forever and ever. And so I inhaled again. The second huff was much like the first, but even more intense. And I felt utter joy. I had found everything I'd ever wanted, and then found that I could have even more of it. A third, then a fourth time, each time better than the time before, and so I just kept going. I would take a huff, stop for air, then go back for another. I was no longer even thinking, it was completely automatic now. I was in a fog of pure bliss, taking in breath after breath of pleasure. Now I really was in my own world, a world where everything was comfort and joy. Then I was laying face down in my own vomit, with no memory of how it happened. I no longer felt pleasure, but my mind was numb to any of the normal sensibilities or inhibitions. My situation did not strike me as being a bad sign or even particularly out of the ordinary. I simply cleaned up the mess, but the next day I saw that I had done a very poor job. I soon became aware of a new feeling. I believed I could just do whatever I wanted to. It wasn't a conscious thought, rather, I would just automatically give in to whatever impulse I felt. I think I could have done myself or other people a lot of harm if my impulses had been dangerous. Luckily, they were only embarrassing, and I will not discuss them here. However, I would have done anything I had the impulse and opportunity to do. Inhibition was non-existent, and I feared that I was a very dangerous person at this stage. I had begun huffing around 7:30 p.m., and had woken up in my vomit at around 8:45. I don't remember throwing up, and I don't know how long I was out. But I was in this uninhibited state for probably 6 more hours before I finally went to sleep. The entire next day I felt horribly groggy and unfocused, and I was incapable of anything mentally or physically demanding. That was my first experience with Duster, and I have had several since. Each has been more pleasurable than the one before. I have learned to control my use of the Duster to avoid passing out, and this has brought the joy of the experience to a new level. 10 good huffs will make me high for 12 hours straight. It feels heavenly, but I have to be careful about when I do it, because I cannot think at all. Coming down has become difficult the past few times. As I am coming down, I search the recesses of my mind, trying to grab hold of the memory of that feeling, but it eludes me. And to make matters worse, Duster is a tease. When I think I've come down, the feelings suddenly come back. And when they come back, I realize how much I love the can, how much I want to feel its joy in me again. But I cannot do this to myself, my family depends on me. So instead I live every day with this craving, with this memory of a feeling I can't quite recall, but that I long for continually. Sometimes I give in. Late last night after the rest of my family was in bed, I snuck out and got a can, and huffed on it for probably 20 minutes. I have been high all day. Even now, 18 hours since my last huff, I just felt another rush, so strong that all I could do was lean back in my chair and revel in the excitement my body was feeling. My head is awash with joy. All kinds of wild thoughts are going through my mind, of things I could do. I want to laugh, dance, and have unbridled sex with my wife, all at once. It feels wonderful, but I know that this must stop. Can I stop? I don't know. This stuff is a trap, as surely as any hard drug. Yes, it's loads of fun, but it's taking over my life. I'm afraid I may do it again tonight, it is consuming me. So I got back from Alabama yesterday, and waiting for me were my friends, ready to do ether. We had always spoke of doing it, but we just had never got the inclination to take action. We used the starter fluid water extraction method in a glass, used a dropper to get the ether out, transfer it to a smaller container, and cut up old t-shirts to use as rags. There were 6 of us. I got my rag and I huffed my ass off. Within maybe a minute I was feeling the full effects of it. There is a definite feeling of exactly how much the ether is affecting you, and this first time was just enough to see the tip of the iceberg on how ether would be. I had trouble standing, but it was fun to try. The most notable thing we all had in common was the constant pulsating of everything. There was a constant whoa 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 that caused everything to almost breathe to its rhythm. There was a slight echo to the things people said. The effects only lasted for a little while, maybe 10 minutes, but I actually have no idea because you really lose the track of time. The second time I did it, I did a lot more. This time it was pure craziness. The pulsating effects of course, but this time I would hear these phrases that it seems like I've heard for years and years and years. Like, childhood dreams that would have these abstract thoughts and feelings to them that I never understood until then. For example, a voice would say, less than 3? Then the pulsating would get slower but stronger, and then I would feel something on my hand. It seems like I've had that dream when I was a very small child, and I never understood it or knew the context of it. But my friend was trying to read a note his grandfather gave him with indistinguishable handwriting, so we couldn't figure out what it said for the life of us. We were passing it around and trying to make sense of it, but our answers would all come out drastically different. It was exactly like on that Seinfeld episode where Jerry sleepily scribbled down what he thought was going to be good material, but when he woke up he couldn't read it and had to get other people to try to figure it out. But anyway, my friend had read it, and said less than 3. The pulsating slowed and grew stronger, and my friend's head had touched the ground and hit my hand. That was the feeling. There was an extreme epiphany at this point, and the same kind of thing happened more. Closing my eyes was a strange experience, and I would see these pulsating shapes and colors moving about, all of which had some kind of prior significance to me. After doing it this second time, I was talking to people about how they felt, and they said there were phrases with great importance to them in their experiences too. We did it one last time, because obviously it is extremely bad for you, and we were running out anyway. The last time it was just 2 of my closest friends and I, which I knew was going to be the best. This time I did a shitload of it. I was just sitting on the bathroom floor and everything became pulsating again. One of my friends was crumpled over himself in uncontrollable laughter. The other just exclaimed, "Why won't Pikachu get out of my vision?" We had played Pokemon Snap for nostalgia's sake just earlier. He then said, "Everyone pet the Pikachu," and he started petting my other friend who was laughing uncontrollably. I did too, as it made sense at the time. Then he said things like, "Good Pikachu, that's such a good Pikachu," etc. etc. Our friends outside the bathroom door could hear all this going on, and it was then that they decided to open the door to see what the fuck was going on. They opened it to find us petting our friend, and praising him for being Pikachu. Hilarity ensued, and I realized what the hell I was doing. Then I tried to walk, and walking is quite a fun experience. Everything is extremely exaggerated. There was a shoe on the ground, and I kept brushing it with my feet. I kept thinking it was a person, or something I wasn't supposed to step on, so I would have to shift my weight and try to get my balance back, which was no easy task. Finally I got fed up, picked up the shoe, and said, "Every time I step on this shoe, I have to constantly reevaluate my sense of balance, and all for nothing. Because it's a fucking shoe." It was a very fun drug to do with people, because we would all say some off-the-wall shit and it would somehow make sense to the rest of us. Of course, we might have all interpreted it differently, which is entirely likely. But all in all, it definitely made me see things in a different way, far different from any kind of drug I've ever done. I'm very glad I did it. This is an account of several trips with inhalants. Philosophical Babble. I took my philosophy degree at the university with the theme Creativity and Language. At the time I was finished, I was convinced that creativity appears as a shift of a form or an image from one common use in a language system to a new one. And the process is not logical, as in being capable to describe all the steps, but it appears as a sudden jump. That jump is a synthesis not made consciously. For example, I took a bath and I watch as the water flows on my watch. I suddenly come with the idea to draw a liquid watch. I've read Jung's works on archetypes and decided that the best way to find out if archetypes existed and had something to do with creativity is to try to experience them. The obvious choices were hallucinogens. I decided to use acetone after I've read an article about it. First trip. There I was sitting with a tube of glue and a plastic bag. All my work had never prepared me of what I was about to experience. After several huffs the sounds start to repeat in a loop. And there it was. It risen from deep inside of me. An ancient being, and it looked at the world around, took a deep breath and laughed. It was happy to live again. In Jung's concepts this would seem to be the shadow. It is important to make the notice that at that time I have not read the Jung's publications about the various archetypes, only a general account of what an archetypal image is. I on the other hand was afraid that I was caught in an endless helix. But the shadow said, "No problem, we are in loop universe. No worry. Here you'll meet yourself and leave yourself." And it started talking to me how different types of drugs catch people in different persons, the persona. The trip was over in 15 minutes. Second trip. Next day I decided to continue. The shadow again welcomed me. It was more clear an image this time. It had a nice sense of humor, the trickster or the fool. It resembled at the same time a fool or a very organized man. It was not within me but as a different persona. As the trip was getting to its end all the hallucination centralized as an upside-down echo that returns to its center or maker. The trip was 30 minutes. Third trip. This was more extreme. I was listening to Bjork at the time. The shadow showed me an empress or a goddess, the enema. I've read the chapter on the enema, but it concerned mostly females, so again it appeared by itself, not from what I've read. Of course the song of Bjork was the raw material with which the image developed. The goddess is very fair and cruel, everyone who tries to marry or kiss her dies. Only a magician can trick her, said the shadow. I'm a magician, said I. Oh, you fancy yourself a trickster? Can you reach me, can you kiss me? Echoes the voice of the goddess from above. Yes, I can, said I. Then two ghosts appeared, red and blue. They manifest in reality only with an automatic gesture or a phrase. They are at war with each other. Wins whoever manages to express himself the most in the world, said the shadow. The empress said, there are different levels of being, a simple phrase repeated is one. A gesture another, much like a human being. But it lives in the lives of others without considering consequences. The flesh is a thought put in a fact, a thought that passes within and trough flesh to become a fact. It's both the lowest and the highest. A free thought is such that needs no flesh to appears, said both the queen and the fool as a choir. With their words I saw colors, abstract shapes and geometric forms. The biggest pain is to live with consequences, was the final echo from the drug. The trip was 40 minutes long. Before the fourth trip, I discovered the formal resemblance between hallucinations and mythology and fairy tales. I decided to use some method of magic to concentrate myself within the trip. I read extensively different mythological texts. I had an important dream. Horus appeared as a number, both 3 and 4. Again I read about the mythological meaning of the numbers afterwards. At the time I woke, the only thing I could put up was that they equal 7. The fourth trip. I sit on my knees and try to focus. I'm like Alice in Wonderland, changing size. The shadow appears and shifts to a monk who will teach me now. He shows me an image of a flower on the flower. This is the most important thing, said he. Afterwards I read about mandala and how it corresponds to the blossoming flower of the rose. This trip was 40 minutes. Fifth and last trip. The goddess and the shadow present me in a grand golden amphitheater. There are all the gods from all the grades and levels of being. You have been chosen to be an emperor, said a golden figure, old man sitting in a throne. The old man. I can't. Look at me. I'm nobody, said I. Stop acting as a spoiled child. You are being chosen. You've passed all the tests. A choir of all the beings echoes. The trip lasted 2 hours. At that point I was afraid of the megalomaniac structure, I'm not sure how to spell that in English, of the hallucinations, and stopped experimenting. Conclusion. The archetypal origin of the hallucinations was quite obvious. But there were a lot more than a display of old mythological figures. The way different ideas were presented with shapes and colors, was a proof of my concept about creativity. At last there was one thing which lies beyond my logical means of explaining. These experiences changed my conscious perception of the world and myself. The only way to describe them now is as a synthesis between spiritual and rational thoughts. In the broadest possible meaning of these two words. I wonder if anyone suspected me of my habit. My addiction. It was on a whim, really, when I decided Use Inhalants for the first time. I was sick, frequenting the bathroom often while my body purged everything I ate in combination with somewhat large amounts of blood. Sitting there on the pot was often boring, and the onset of these moments were hardly predictable, so I rarely had time to grab some sort of reading material. I often read the backs of bottles of shampoo, hairspray, air freshener, anything I could get my hands on, to alleviate the boredom. If I was lucky, one of the boys would have left their World of Warcraft guide sitting on the sink for me to flip through. Of everything, though, the warning on the back of the air freshener can intrigue me the most. Caution, use only as directed. Intentional misuse by deliberately concentrating and inhaling the contents can be harmful or fatal. Help stop inhalation abuse. From prior experiences running with the wrong crowd back at my old school, I knew that warning meant it could get me high. Previous to this, I had been the type to pop pills, having easy access to them since my doctors always prescribed me all kinds of crazy shit that was more likely to fuck me up than to actually help my persistent mental and physical problems. Every now and then, I'd have a smoke, or a drink, whenever my underage self could get my hands on it. Anything to get rid of the pain I was constantly dealing with, thanks to my poor health. By the time I'd started considering inhaling the contents of this can of air freshener, I'd been clean for months, Having recently moved away from my doctors, and my father's money that could get me the drugs I'd wanted, I saw that air freshener as a possible return to the times when I'd been happiest, and felt most alive. It took me several days of picking up the can, staring at it, and putting it back down, before I could work up the courage to actually try it. The can did say, after all, that inhaling it was potentially fatal. I did not want to die. I eventually decided that if I only took one huff, it couldn't possibly hurt me, and I would still be able to get a little high. I'd never liked getting majorly fucked up anyway. Something about losing all control of myself while under the influence of a drug never appealed to me, yet the pleasant buzz of a mild high always attracted me like nothing else. At first, I couldn't decide how to go about inhaling it. I'd never heard of anyone using air freshener to get high, but I knew it was possible from the labeling of the can itself. Eventually I figured out that if I depressed the trigger only a small bit, I could get the gas without shooting off the liquid as well. I took in only a small bit through my nose and mixed with air. Just one hit, and I felt pleasantly lightheaded, with little colored dots surrounding my field of vision, much like how I felt while drunk. A small, almost insignificant ringing noise accompanied it. And then, just like that, the feeling was gone, leaving me feeling slightly, but decidedly off. As if something was not quite right. Almost tired, but not quite. That off feeling persisted for several hours, but I didn't mind it. Somehow its presence made me feel like I was able to better concentrate on my current writing project. The words flowed almost effortlessly through my fingers. It was several days before I tried it again, and when I did, I again felt the same feelings as before, only a little stronger. I decided then, that I needed that feeling, needed that high. It somehow made the entire world less disgusting to look at, and the filth of the house I now lived in somewhat less vile and easier to ignore. After a time, I started getting headaches when I used too much, but I simply took an Excedrin for the headache, and enjoyed the high I got from the caffeine in the pill. I continued using it, up until I was taking 2 or 3 hits per bathroom gut dump session. It got to the point to where I didn't ever know how much time would pass while I'm in there, but my ass would always be numb from sitting on that goddamn toilet for so long. Despite this, it took several weeks for me to finish off that can of air freshener and move on to the can of hairspray. Immediately upon using the hairspray, I realized that it took far less from it to get myself to that pleasant lightheadedness I enjoyed so much. I went back down to taking only 1 hit per gut dump session. I remember, somehow the sound of the gas entering my nose made me think of a choir of black boys all dressed in blue or maroon robes. I never quite knew why, but I found it entertaining, as those thoughts would inevitably lead to thoughts of Kermit the Frog. Possibly because I knew a black boy who went to a nearby private school named Kermit, and the uniform shirts he had to wear were always maroon. As time wore on, I told myself I needed to stop and find an alternate source for my high, because the can of hairspray was an expensive brand, and I knew my mom would be pissed if it got all used up so quickly. But I never actually stopped. I found myself another can of air freshener to use instead of my mom's hairspray, and continued my habit until that was gone. Around then, before my second can ran out, I needed to go to the hospital for a week for several blood transfusions, due to the severity of my anemia at the time. The doctors all seemed amazed that I was alive, much less walking and talking and functioning like a normal human being without passing out somewhere along the way. I'd been going to school, lugging around a big heavy bag with my books, and there had been times then where my vision would nearly black out and I would nearly collapse, but I never did. A part of me wonders if I was able to do that because I would push myself forward, muscles aching and trembling, and focus entirely on the movement of putting one foot in front of the other, to avoid the embarrassment of passing out in a public place. That same part wonders if the chemicals in my system helped with that focus, because the feeling of being high again as if I'd been huffing, always seemed to coincide with those dizzy spells. When I got out of the hospital, I felt better than ever, free from my addiction to inhalants, free from the restrictions that the anemia caused, free from the feeling of pain, as I was back on the medications I'd been using before. Once those pills ran out though, and I couldn't ever convince my mother to refill the prescription, I returned to the inhalants. I would continue huffing for another year before I realized the very real possibility that this could very well kill me. I was at my mom's fiance's parents' house, and while I was in their bathroom, doing the usual, I realized that this high was different. My heart rate went up drastically, and I felt as if I would faint, much like the since returned anemic spells I frequently had. I forced myself to lay down on that dirty bathroom floor, hoping it would pass. It felt like time dragged on, and my heart began to ache. I prayed that I was not dying and eventually it slowed and went away. What felt to me like hours, Had really only been a matter of minutes, but it was enough to scare the living hell out of me. I didn't touch inhalants for several months after that, fearing that if I did it again, I would die. But the can of air freshener always called me back, and I once again fell into the habit, though I was slightly more cautious about it now. I'm not sure what changed, but in recent weeks, I haven't really felt the urge to inhale, and reading some of these other experiences, I know I don't want to ever touch it again. I've been free of it for several weeks now, yet my mind feels fuzzy. I know I destroyed something with my abuse. The headaches come more frequently, and they often turn to migraines, which by themselves are an entire new painful trip of their own. Now I just get high off of the Excedrin. I can't be sure what it is, but I'm positive it's the caffeine in it that causes my high, as I am still anemic, and I've lost weight recently. I don't mind. Caffeine is a legal substance. Looking back, I know I shouldn't have started using inhalants. It's made my already poor memory worse, and there are holes that cover nearly the entirety of my life prior to now. I doubt I'll ever regain those memories, and not having a past to look back on is far more painful than any physical hurt I have to endure. It's a mistake I regret constantly, and I can only be consoled by my excessive need to keep a record of things I've done in the day. But even with reading those, I feel like I'm reading someone else's story. I'm still young, though, and I have time to make more memories to replace the ones I lost. I'm lucky I pulled out of the habit when I did.
At the time, I was a 16-year-old girl. I had been experimenting with drugs since I had turned 14, and had dabbled with alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, cocaine, mushrooms, and I assumed that huffing keyboard cleaner would just be a mediocre high, silly like a robo trip, and easy to stop. I was wrong. I discovered the can in my house one day, and planned to use it that night, as my family would be gone. I put on some Animal Collective and took a huff of the cleaner. Within 10 seconds, I could feel a wave of warm numbness coming towards me. The wave surrounded my brain, filling my head with a pleasant buzzing. The buzzing spread from my brain, and filled my body with a warmness that I haven't found in any drug since. My body was filling with strange pulsating vibes, a numbness that can be compared to the opposite of electric shock. I entered a void of pleasurable calmness for about 5 minutes, before the high faded. I immediately missed the pulsing warmness of the drug, so I took another huff, a bigger one this time. It instantly hit my body, and I returned to the state that I had been in before. I sat in the coziest chair I could find, and sat with my mouth hanging open, feeling my face. I had entered a different reality, physically the same, but emotionally foreign. My brain was flooded with psychedelic thoughts, and I experienced a handful of visuals that blew my mind. Colors and textures had completely changed, and the world around me was morphing and glowing. My body was filled with a warmness from my head to my toe, and all the while filled with a loud but comforting buzz. I continued to hit the bottle once or twice every 5 minutes, until it was so cold that I could no longer hold it. I went all the way to wrap it in a towel, just so I could continue huffing. After about an hour and a half of constantly huffing, I lost complete track of time. Time itself had left me, and I was in a completely different reality. I had been sitting and drooling on myself for a few hours. I took a huge hit, emptying the bottle. I let the high surround me, fill my body. This time, it hit me in the wrong way. I instantly saw the world around me begin to spin out of control. My body temperature rose rapidly, and I broke out in a sweat. I stumbled my way to the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, and I looked like I had been awake for days. The rest of these memories are a blur, but this is what I remember. I stared in the mirror, feeling my face. The only way I knew I was touching myself was from my reflection. I was instantly scared that I would be stuck this way, that I had been high for days and would never calm down. I felt the world around me breaking down, and was instantly convinced that I was going to die. I slapped myself in the face to try to bring myself down, alert myself back to reality, but I had lost all feeling. I continued to slap and punch myself until I lost faith, and accepted that I was going to die. Physical sickness shot through me, and I threw up for about 20 minutes, the most violent puke session I have ever had. Convinced I was going to die, I filmed a video on my camcorder, stating that if I was dead the next morning, I was sorry, and that I loved everyone. I was fully convinced that I was about to die, and was ready to say my goodbyes. I called my friend to tell her what was going on, and she told me to run to the shower, turn on the cold water, and stand in it until my body temperature came down. I woke up about half an hour later, as from electric shock. I was instantly brought back to reality, stinging throat, fully clothed, in the cold shower. I stumbled out, threw on a towel, and crashed. To this day, I feel an instant sickness when I am around the smell of keyboard cleaner. The high started out great, but almost ended lethally. If I am ever going to do it again, I now know not to do more than 3 or 4 huffs. But it is not worth the risk of brain damage or death. I wish you all beautiful days ahead.
My experience with inhalants was absolutely dreadful. Not only was it scary, but it is a miracle I am not dead or vegetable. After heavily using drugs, I moved to another state and therefore lost all of my connections. Feeling depressed and with no drugs to use, I turned to inhalants. Anyway, enough with the background. Here's my experience, taking place over about 2 months. Sitting around the house with nothing to do, I came across a can of butane about the size of a can of spray paint. I used one of the attachments for filling a lighter to breathe the gas in, taking straight butane, no oxygen. The experience was almost a relief at that point in time. Anything that would get me high was good at the time. Lightheadedness and an array of geometric colors began to show up. There sounded like there was a sound similar to that of an industrial fan or something of that nature coming from the air vent. In addition to that, I felt almost paralyzed, as if I was in a trance. Looking back, it was probably brain cells being fried. I continued to use for several days, and the experience slowly began to become something far more than I could have ever imagined. Over the period of a couple days, I began to feel almost as if I was in an alternate reality whenever I inhaled the butane. It was like everything around me was exactly the way it should be. I can't even explain it. Almost like looking at a picture of someone's room in a magazine and not one thing was out of place, even though my room was a disaster. This feeling of an alternate reality seemed to go hand in hand with the euphoric feeling I was experiencing. However, as my daily use continued, I began to hallucinate whenever I used. It started off with small things. Sounds and small visual distortions such as red trails appearing in the air, always red for some reason. Doing spirals were most common at first. Then, I started to become paranoid whenever I used. The hallucinations seemed to adapt to that paranoia, greatly intensifying it. This is where things got so messed up I can hardly describe it. Not using text anyway. I will do the best I can. As I continued to use, it started to seem like there was a dark shadow literally on the corner of my eyeball. A feeling of heaviness seemed to occupy that spot as well. I started to feel like there was a demon or something out to get me. As I continued to use, the feeling of a demon in my presence became more real. I began to feel as if this shadow was going into my eye from that dark spot. It felt wet, and like it was the hottest thing I have ever felt, only it didn't burn. It truly was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. As this feeling began to get worse and stronger, a feeling of impending doom came over me at the same time. Like if I let this thing continue going into my eye, I would die a horrible death, and worse feelings would continue long after. In an attempt to eradicate that,